In today's business world, change is the only constant, and mastering transformation is the ultimate key to success. Welcome to Shift and Thrive. I'm your host, Natalie Nathanson. Each week, we'll bring you conversations with CEOs who delve into how they successfully drove critical change in their organization. This show is sponsored by Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service B2B marketing agency. Welcome to another special edition episode on Shift and Thrive as part of our Go-to-Market Spotlight series. If you're a CEO or business leader wondering how your go-to-market strategy needs to evolve right now to meet today's market realities, this episode is for you. And I am super excited to introduce today's guest. She's a hands-on go-to-market strategist with over 20 years of experience working with early and growth stage startups. Earlier in her career, she served as a VP of research at Topo, later acquired by Gartner, where she authored over 100 reports and analyzed the fastest growing SaaS companies. She's also an entrepreneur herself, including having co-founded a climate tech startup. Today, she's in venture capital and advises founders and CEOs to help them strengthen their go-to-market strategy and incorporate AI to help drive scalable growth outcomes. She is the entrepreneur in residence at Scale Venture Partners. Kristina McMillan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Natalie. It's wonderful to be here.
I'm really looking forward to the conversation and have a lot of topics that I want to dive in with you today, but really wanted to start talking about go-to-market transformation in a world impacted by AI. And I'll share that, from my perspective, most, tech CEOs and founders that I know are certainly already thinking or working seriously about how AI impacts their business overall, and often with product leading the charge, not always quite as much on the go-to-market side. So, I think it'd be really helpful to give listeners a bit of insight into what kinds of transformations are taking place. And so given your vantage point, is there a specific example of a recent AI-driven go-to-market transformation you could share?
Sure. And I've always considered myself very fortunate to sit in the seat that I sit in because I get to see a lot of different organizations and how they're growing and changing. When I was younger in my consulting days, I used to call it job hopping securely because I got to see a lot of different things. So one story that I thought was really impressive that I've heard in the last 6 months is not a portfolio company of scale, but another organization. And what's interesting is AI was not the thing that started the transformation, but AI supported the transformation. So this particular organization had been growing pretty well up to about a $50 million SaaS company. And then all of a sudden, everything just started tanking around them. They dropped to around 30 million in revenue per year. And it was sliding downhill in the wrong direction. They brought in some fresh folks on the executive team to try and literally turn it around. They had a 2-year mandate. Let's turn this around, see if we can become a market leader and if we can get to 100 million. We have to Hail Mary, this is it. Let's try and see if we can do this. And what I think was so interesting is that team, what's old is new again. And that team went back to some really, really important basics from a go-to-market standpoint. I'll call it thought leadership 2.0. And so I've been in and around watching a lot of different markets come and go, a lot of different vendor categories come and go. And we all know kind of thought leadership can be very helpful to that, to an organization finding their way, establishing a brand that is then trusted and credible and growing from there. But that's changed. Thought leadership used to be a lot about our organization having an opinion. This particular company decided that they were going to put the people forward. They're going to take their executive team, each in their different positions, the head of marketing, the head of sales, head of product, the CEO themselves, all of them in their different vantage points. I think only one of them was a founder, but they said we all have a perspective on how what we do as a business affects people, affects our target prospects. And so they set out to do a very specific personal branding oriented thought leadership, which is why I kind of call it thought leadership 2.0. And what was really magical about it is they coordinated it as a team. They used AI to be able to execute. So obviously creating a lot of content across a lot of different individuals was really challenging at first, but they used AI to do that and were able to create consistency, create accountability. And literally it was things like the CMO would be like, all right, CEO, all right, head of product, have you guys posted on LinkedIn today? Very, very basic things, but it created an incredible momentum for the organization. And they, within 18 months, they had hit, they were back on track. And at the end of 2 years, they hit 100 million. I mean, it's astonishing. We all want to grow that fast anyway, but to have grown and then contracted and then be able to stretch beyond that is just, it was incredible. So I guess my main message there is for everyone listening, even with AI, as much as we will talk about it, let's not forget that there's a combination of old things are now possible again with AI. So let's not forget some of those old basics.
I love that message. And I love so much of what you just shared. There's really two areas that really jump out at me. I'll talk about foundations in a moment, as you mentioned it. But I think, that concept of branding, and when a company is struggling with, especially a startup, kind of struggling with lead gen or needing kind of more pipeline as quickly as humanly possible, the temptation is lead gen, and where can we put in more dollars in, right? Things like paid ads and more sales
Yeah.
dialing and things like that. And your example is a perfect one for why, unfortunately, the quick fixes are not often the most fruitful ones, and the increasing and kind of growing role of brand.
Yeah. And I think, it's worth saying, particularly with that, because a lot of folks are questioning their old methods, right? The way we used to build pipeline is not working. The way we used to try and, engage prospects early is not working. So how do we do things differently? But sometimes doing differently is not um, something completely new. It is actually revisiting old things. So we are seeing people revisiting handwritten notes and veto campaigns from like the early 2000s. And some of that stuff is it's easier to execute now because of all the additional resources that AI supports, but also because those things were one-to-one and highly targeted and personalized in a way that is standing out amongst the digital noise that we have today. So we can dig
Yeah,
in more to those.
for sure. And, we're often talking to our clients about like the same kind of thing, the old tactics through new techniques, right? And I think you can use,
Yeah.
whether it's AI or automation or some combination of that, to be able to get a lot more done, make it easier for these thought leaders and SMEs to not start with a blank page, but use
Yep.
these kind of tools the right way and move through that. The other area you referenced was kind of some of these foundations, which I think is another area I'd be interested in your view, but we're often talking about a greater importance of getting the foundations right and thinking of like ideal client profile and your messaging and unique positioning and all of those things, which are very tempting, I think, to skip over. But I would say like more important than ever. And I'm curious, like, do you see this? What are the areas that you talk about when you think about like the key foundations to get right?
Yeah, I think in the early wave of AI adoption and go to market, we all sort of thought like, phew, all that hard preparation we did, we're not going to have to do anymore. The reality is it's even more important. I think folks who are adopting AI are realizing faster than ever that they need to, if they didn't have a good ideal customer profile, they need to go define one because AI is not going to be able to pick for them. It does not have the taste and judgment to be able to pick the direction. It can just make a bunch of recommendations. And so teams that were weak on some of those foundations before I've seen them try to scale without it and have to sort of reset, restart, redefine, and clarify those things before we can then push forward. The same goes for process. I'm often talking to folks who are trying to incorporate AI either on an individual level, a team level, or org wide. And what usually happens is they say, like, well, I tried it and I didn't really think it was that great. And I hate to say it, but we usually revisit like what you put in and what you get out of it. So yes, it can help save a lot of time, and we'll talk about examples of how people are doing that. But you can't skip over some of those foundational steps. If you haven't done the thinking, AI is not going to be able to clarify the thinking for you. It can offer brainstorming help. It can give you ideas, but like at some point you have to clarify all of that for you to get out what you need. So foundations are more important than ever in that equation.
Yes, thank you for underscoring that with such great insight. Uh, I wanted to ask, like, who, in your view, needs to be involved in that strategic thinking? And I had Singram Vajra in a episode recently, and we
Mhm.
were talking a lot about kind of the different voices and kind of roles that need to be in the room. And I'd be curious to hear from you, like, what are those most critical ones, especially given kind of your purview of kind of the I guess, A and B stage funded startups.
Yeah. I mean, when you're early stage, I mean, I think the benefit of that is you've got a much smaller team. And so your ability to be nimble and to do things across lines, sales and marketing lines, let's say, is heightened. And I think it's essential to take advantage of that. So in the example for that I shared, the transformation story, one thing that I thought was really cool was the CMO was driving a lot of the onus around we need to do this type of thought leadership. But what was really beautiful is how they were orchestrating it across all of the lines. So in that case, go to market strategy, specifically around this thought leadership, um, they were going around and helping each thought leader figure out their unique point of view so that they can then generate their content and meet their posts, et cetera. And they had accountability metrics across all of them. But then what happened was they were also enabling their reps to be able to take those posts and traffic them on their behalf. So if we look at back in circa 2012, where social selling was all the rage, and we wanted every rep to be an expert, right? We wanted every rep to have their social selling brand and persona. The reality is that's not credible to the prospect. Like your average rep, unless they have 20 years of experience in the industry and can talk about that, they're not the right person to be that expert, but they absolutely can be the one to share the expertise from credible places. And so coordinating those posting efforts with then trafficking them with the team, and that doesn't have to just be reps, it could be the entire marketing team is trafficking them on their LinkedIn. We're trafficking it on the company page, and then doing things like marketing is then organizing events, and the reps want to invite accounts. So the reps go to the executive who might know and say, can you invite this account and include me? And so this triangulation of all these activities that are based around this thought leadership just led to some of the most beautiful orchestration of go-to-market motions that I've seen in a while. And so my message would be is like, consider doing things across lines that might not seem scalable, but get you to what the results that you need. Once you figure those out on that sort of more smaller, unscalable level, then you can figure out how to scale it from there. And AI can help with a lot of those things.
Yeah, that's music to my ears. And I like the point about like, moving across the typical lines. I think it does require a shift in mindset from, marketing owns this, sales owns this, nobody else needs to get involved, right? To really showing the benefit when you do have kind of the right thought leaders, SMEs, product leads, et cetera, working kind of
Yeah.
across the go-to-market efforts. I would love to dig in a bit deeper and maybe more specifically around AI and how you see it showing up in go-to-market. Can you talk about kind of some of the ways you're seeing it in kind of in your purview?
Yeah. So, and I'll maybe create a little structure to this. So I'm seeing a lot of use cases at what I'll call the individual level. Like I think that the floor for good is raising. Like right now, everyone's in a transition where they're learning how to leverage AI, and we're a lot of the conversation is around how to leverage agents, which to me are things that are more department and organizational level. There's still a lot folks can do on the individual level to level up their own game, to level up their team's game, et cetera. And so I'll give an example first on maybe the individual level. So obviously in sales, we're seeing things like using AI for meeting prep. It's like, take a look at everything I've done and give me a quick summary so that I'm knowledgeable when I go in, as if I had been talking to only this account. I'm really knowledgeable about what's happening. Um, Help me do things like prepare for and follow up so that I, as a rep, have really, really good hygiene. Those are some like very basic execution things. On the marketing side, of course, we do things like content generation. In the research that we've done on go-to-market AI adoption, marketers have been the fastest and most furious adopters of AI. And it's because one of the biggest things that marketing has to do, which is pump out content, was really well aligned to what AI did right out of the gate. It might not have been the best writer, but it sure as heck got you to that first draft faster, which then allows you to edit faster, which then allowed you to get stuff out the door faster. And so I think anything that can be done on that individual level is something that everybody should be looking at. What can I do? What are the repetitive tasks that I'm trying to do that can be done bigger, faster, stronger, smarter with AI? So another example that I really like is one of our portfolio companies took that to what I would say is almost like a really cool extreme. they were trying to reach out to CEOs in their prospect base, and they were like, we're just not getting any response. And so they said, well, what if we just tried to offer a ton of value? Sort of a little bit account based 101, but what if we could create custom market research reports for their business on the challenges facing their industry and just some ideas related to what we do on how their particular business could navigate those? Incredibly value, almost a consulting like deliverable. But I'm sure everyone listening would be like, oh, that must take a lot of time and effort. They used AI to do it, and they could create 20 to 30-page market research reports in minutes using deep research, the earliest iteration of deep research in ChatGPT. Then they would package those, and they would instead of having it sent from a rep, they would have it sent from their CEO to the other CEO, and they would use that to just get that first conversation. It was wildly successful. And they credit their success to this micro segmentation. It was one report for each account. And normally we might, if, pre AI, we'd never be able to create that type of content with that depth of richness and doing all of that type of research. It's people pay thousands of dollars for market research reports like that. But now we can offer that value directly ourselves. Now, theoretically, the prospect could go and do that themselves, but they don't have time. And so, what I find really, really interesting is we can now delight them by doing their work for them as a value add in our go to market motion. And that's just been so promising. So, on that individual level, there's still a ton of value. As we move up into the more department and or team and department level, let's say, we're seeing things in like helping workflows of the team move faster. It doesn't mean the entire thing is agentic and autonomous, but things like, again, I'll use content as an example. If we are trying to support a meaningful social media presence, we've got a lot of assets we have to create. And we could use, ChatGPT and do that ourselves, but now we're seeing things like Canva, who is helping you take one campaign and create many different formats of assets that might support. It could be a month's worth of content in a matter of a couple of hours. Um, it's simply so powerful that it's just, you can't ignore what it could do for you and your team. And so as we continue to go up beyond just individual and team level, those are very focused on productivity, like how do we do more in less time, and how do we create those outputs? As we continue to move up the scale of use cases, we're starting to look at things like how do we improve the quality of what we're doing? So some of those later adoption use cases look at things like how can we use AI to analyze the behaviors that we've been doing and make better decisions? How can we go back and look at past deals to identify signals that we weren't aware of that are indications of good deals that will eventually close? So those are just some examples of the cool things that I'm seeing people do.
I think those are great. And I like how you kind of took us through almost like a maturity model of, these different types of examples, which I think is a really helpful mental model for other leaders to be thinking about. I'm interested to hear, one of the first example that you gave around kind of the individual like salesperson use. Maybe this is more of a philosophical question for you, but do you feel like organizations can get to kind of a department level shift or some of these higher levels without like every individual in that department, let's maybe stay with the sales team, using it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, so there's a lot of concern that productivity improvements, it's like all this magical time saved, is the goal of AI. But then what are people doing with that time saved? And what I think is really, really interesting is to answer your question specifically, at some point, everyone in our organization needs to have basic AI knowledge. I equate it to, when I was in school, it was back when they taught us how to type, right? And everyone had to learn that basic um, fundamental skills of business. AI is going to be one of those on the individual level. You will need to figure out how to apply it to your individual role to make you better in that individual role. That said, when we're applying it to roles that duplicate in organizations like a sales team, it doesn't mean that I want each person to repeat those things individually. Can we put some of that stuff behind the scenes? So we have one organization that presented at our Go to Market AI Summit. And what was really cool is they had hundreds of sales reps, and they said, we're going to set out to save the sales reps 10 hours per rep per week. So Could we do lots of little AI, efficiency projects to add up to 10 hours per rep per week? And of course, they want their reps to be able to, use AI and all of that, but they just said, let's just take that off the table for right now. Could we create the space for them completely behind the scenes? So things like before they would have to go in and click in 5 different places to look at the account history and prepare for a meeting. Could we actually look at their calendar, see what meetings are on their calendar, and then have AI automatically pull synopses and email them to them in the morning so that all the rep has to do is open their email? And they did things like this that delighted their reps. Like they said it was astonishing. Like we thought for sure the reps would be like, I wanted somewhere in Salesforce, but their reps were not even using some of the platforms that they had used as their foundational systems because they could just go to their email and get what they needed. That then allowed them the space in the organization to try more things. And I think last I checked, they were up to like 8.7 hours on average per rep per week with those types of things. So yes, the entire workforce will need to step up. But what we don't need to do is have everybody figuring out how to set up their own agents, how to create their own custom GPTs, how to get perfect at prompting just yet. There's a lot of improvement we can make for them and then scale behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think that's a great framework. And I think the reality is, some individuals just based on personality or how their mind works, et cetera, will naturally like latch on more easily and intuitively to coming up
Absolutely.
with their own kind of new workflows and things like that, whereas others benefit from that happening at kind of the department level and then using what is brought, just like any kind of sales enablement function. Hey, this is Natalie, your Shift and Thrive host. After chatting with lots of CEOs, one thing is crystal clear. Leveling up your company means having a killer go-to-market strategy. That's what my crew at Magnitude Consulting does every day. If you're trying to step up your marketing game, whether it's strategizing, accelerating your pipeline, expanding into new markets, or getting into AI and automation, let's talk. No pitch, no pressure, just good conversation. Visit shiftandthrivepodcast.com/Natalie to schedule a time. Can't wait to connect. I'm curious to ask from kind of an organizational structure standpoint, if there are shifts you're seeing or advising founders around kind of staffing or structuring either sales or marketing teams or both.
Yeah, definitely 100%. The biggest change that I'm seeing is that we need to bring, because we don't have our entire organization stepped up and it's like default now that everyone knows best practices around AI, we need to bring in folks that know. And so, for example, we're seeing a lot of RevOps teams start to bring on go-to-market engineers. And that's because knowing AI and knowing the models and interacting with the models can't be a side of desk for anyone. So it can't be like I have my main job and then I sort of do AI. Things are just changing too fast. And getting somebody in there to dig in and really understand it is required. So there originally there was thinking that this person needed to be like a seasoned director who's also technical. That's not the case. They're bringing on very early career folks who are just tech wonky and like to get in there and like get their hands dirty on like, oh, I used Base 44 and created a website in 10 minutes, or oh, I did just use Claude Cowork and figured out how to do blah blah blah. Like people who really enjoy that. And so there will be the people who need to understand what's possible with AI and then apply that to the subject matter areas we need to improve. And so we're seeing the partnership of that technical person with a subject matter person, creating kind of that AI uh, nerve center, if you will, in an organization. For organizations that don't have RevOps or aren't necessarily that far along to have that type of function, we're seeing CMOs do it, where it's like, I want my own internal AI person who's going to be able to help me figure out workflows, help me set all of that up, and get it dialed. So individual organization, like department organizations, are creating centers of excellence as well. But having somebody who's in charge of staying up to date on the models, figuring out how to make everything work is really important, because that brings us to the second point, which is organizations are now setting up an agentic workforce, which means just as I have a people org chart, I'm starting to have an agent org chart. And we need somebody to manage those agents, because as my organization starts to love it, as things go wrong, that's going to be problematic. So that those reps that love now getting those short summaries to their email every morning to prepare for their calls, all of a sudden one day they don't get them and they're like, I'm not prepared for my, like, what are you doing? Like, and they get upset about it. And so they need somebody who can then troubleshoot that, because as models change, integrations are changing, all of these things break left and right. And so we are definitely seeing orgs change to add in that capability to be able to build those agentic workforces themselves. That said, I think we are entering a period where more folks are going to be buying point tools, because not everybody can afford the technical debt of setting up your own build infrastructure. So on an individual level, having it to make the individuals successful is great. But when we get to more of the agentic, that's where I think, and especially if you're in a regulated industry or things like that, going to some of those vendors who are compliant and whatever they need to be compliant, know how to handle things like PII, know how to deal with certain regulatory requirements, can be very beneficial.
That is super helpful. And I want to take the kind of CEO and founder view for a moment and ask, what patterns are you seeing when it comes to like when founders are either helping or hurting kind of their organization's charter, like specifically within the go-to-market arena?
Yeah, most of what I've seen is helping. I think where it starts to hurt is when we try to. So I mentioned there's like the individual level, then the team department level, and then organizational. It's very hard to skip doing things on the individual level and then think you're going to be successful on the agentic organization wide level. And so those that try to skip ahead and overcomplicate and like dive full in on like rebuilding the cruise ship on the ocean are the ones that a can't get all the way through the planning process and therefore can't actually get anything implemented. And so really starting small is beneficial. So I'm still working, one-to-one advising executives on like how they individually should use AI so that they can then be prescriptive to their teams on their expectations around using AI. And then their teams can help them. They do things like hackathons to come up with ideas for team-centered workflows. And then that gives them the baseline understanding of how we might then do this org wide across, more mission critical systems. And so I think that the mistake is when we try to jump ahead in the learning too fast, and don't have that good base foundational knowledge of how it impacts our stakeholders internally.
I like that. And I hadn't really thought about like the hackathon almost as like a litmus test kind of function. We did something like that in my marketing firm last quarter, and created kind of a made up brand and kind of bringing it to market within I don't know 4-hour window or so. And it was both like the risk free environment to work in,
Hmm.
low stakes because it's not kind of a real world situation, but I think also as a litmus test, it's very beneficial, and seeing where those friction points are. What seems
Yeah.
like it should be kind of easy to do or AI can layer in, but it's actually not working the way that it should. So I think there's just so many
Yeah.
benefits to something like that.
One other thing I would offer, for CEOs, and this applies to go to market, but applies to the organization at large as well, is it's really well. You have to recognize the value of what AI can bring. Once you do, you have to make sure that your team understands that bringing AI in is not going to replace the humans. Now, it may mean we don't need to grow as fast from a human headcount standpoint to get to where we need to get to in our revenue goals. That's a good thing. But I am seeing organizations where you have pockets of people who are very, very AI reluctant. And it's often because when we say, great, like you're a content writer, AI can help with all of that. What it's causing for people is this like, well, if that's what I did before, I have no idea what I'm going to do next. So it doesn't mean that the organization is going to fire that person, but their jobs are going to change. Their roles are going to change. The what defines good in their role is going to change. And if we don't do some thinking about that first to help the humans transition and be ready to let go of those old things to AI, we're sort of creating that uncertainty, and that creates chaos, and that creates, unproductiveness in the teams that we have. So thinking through, like, here's an example. If we did have somebody who was developing content and that was all they did because that was like so much to do, um, AI is going to help relieve some of that. So does that open up strategic responsibilities for that person? That their job is actually going to be a little more campaign planning, or brainstorming, on a brand level where we want to take things. And do they have the capability? So how can we equip them to step into those new responsibilities so we can release some of those old responsibilities to AI and we still keep the talent that we need?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because, on the podcast, I talk about a lot of different types of transformation in organizations, and psychological safety for the team is just such an important one. And I think that really, underscores it. And I think it doesn't help when kind of individuals are seeing, plastered all over LinkedIn, kind of hey, we slashed this many roles and it was
Yep.
easy all because of AI, right? And so for every
Yeah.
leader to make sure that they're communicating that authentically and clearly to their team.
Yeah. And it's worth noting, maybe just like a little bit of a gossip from the industry. A lot of those teams that slashed are now rehiring because they slashed prematurely because they didn't have a good sense for how AI was going to execute. And the quality, the taste, and the judgment of what was executed was subpar. And so we're bringing back people to manage the quality, the taste, and the judgment.
Yes, that's a great point. I want to talk a little bit about kind of ROI and kind of measuring impact in kind of AI go to market activities. And you gave the example of the sales team and kind of setting the target of 10 hours. I want to just hear from you how you think about kind of setting and capturing an ROI and metrics in general in this world.
Yeah, well, it's first worth noting that a couple months ago on LinkedIn, there was like a whole slew of posts that went crazy around bashing productivity as the ROI in AI. And I just want to say, like, that is a mistake. Productivity is absolutely a win. Now, we know there's research out there that shows that when we create more time and space for people to do a job, it doesn't mean that they will do the job faster. Like, whatever amount of time you have to do the job, if we allotted 2 weeks, it typically takes 2 weeks. So what do we do to try and capture those productivity gains? Is we need to move the goalposts. So a thing that used to take 2 weeks, once we learn that we can do it in less, we need to move the goalpost forward so that we can then put more beneficial activities behind it. It's also things like I saw some really great research that showed that they looked at the amount of time saved and then what was actually done, and execs were dismayed. They were like happy, but also dismayed at the fact that most of that time saved went to work life balance. And so people who were absolutely burnt out and working too hard before were getting better balance and they wanted that, but they were also like, that's a really hard thing to justify spending money on. And so I think the first thing is productivity is absolutely a win, and we need to figure out how to measure. So like the example I gave where they measured it in hours saved per rep per week, a great one. To be able to do that, you need to understand what it looked like before. What was the baseline before? Like what were, for example, the number of activities that we could get done in a given period, or how long did certain activities take us, so that after with AI, we can then compare, right? It's like we went from X activities to Y activities, or it took, this long and now it's, 50% less time. Like we just have to be able to measure that. But that said, AI is one of those things that there's a lot of little things that add up. So it's really hard to say AI contributed to better conversion rates. When I mentioned before how, all of the individualized and even the team level AI use cases are focused on productivity, after that is the use cases that focus on improving quality. That's where we're seeing changes to things like conversion rates. So, for example, if we know conversion rates tank, we can use AI to analyze um, behaviors or activities or campaigns or whatever it was, to then be able to figure out how we make better decisions that then yield better conversion rates. But I think a lot of people are expecting, like, if I do a thing here, I want to see it immediately all the way down the road. And it's just like, we used to say with SDRs, you can't expect an SDR to control the quality that is beyond their role, right? So they can generate a great qualified meeting, but it's not their job to close it. So we can't necessarily always hold them accountable to whether things close because it's not within their control. The same goes for AI. It can only have so much of a sphere of control, and we have to put that into perspective. That said, we are starting to measure things like go to market spend per person, right? So it's like we want to look at things like, are we improving the dollars per person that we're generating in revenue? And are we improving the cost metrics of what it costs for those people? And so That's a little more of a zoomed out version. We would look at that across all go-to-market spend. We'd also look at that across marketing spend or sales spend. It's, are we getting more productive with the humans and the dollars that we have? And how is AI contributing to that? I think those metrics are still fairly early, but we can see in our own portfolio that those that are very AI forward have better outcomes. They are just more productive. Like, the old SaaS metrics of, like, we look at revenue per employee as a thing, and like somewhere between 300 and 500,000 used to be good. Now it's like, with AI, that could be closer to 1 million per employee or farther. And so it's looking at things like that overall organization effectiveness and outcomes, where we're rolling up all of those little AI initiatives.
Yeah. And I think from even from my own organization's experience, just seeing kind of how that has incrementally evolved as we've kind of maybe moved up to the maturity stage or just gotten more ingrained with our use. Because I remember initially we were having the team kind of track like estimated time savings on individual tasks and then kind of aggregating that and looking at the impact. But as from the staying with this individual example, as each person gets more kind of AI native and it's just ingrained in how they work, it gets harder to even put those time estimates next to it because it's everywhere and it's in
Yeah.
everything you do. Uh, but just to show that it really does need to progress how you look at that as an organization and kind of revisit that.
Yeah. I think it's also worth saying that for organizations that have adopted AI, it's really important to think, at this point, what would happen if I took it out? Like, that's a really important signal in an organization, because as we've given it to employees, and as long as we've got the right, securities and the right, like, protections to make sure that we're protecting our data, it's important to note that if people are feeling like it's making their job easier, better, faster, et cetera, there is value in that. And so the example of the sales reps, the thing being sent to their inbox, they're not directly using ChatGPT to do that, but they love the outcome. And that matters. That has a value in the organization in terms of retaining that talent, in terms of um, uh, motivating those people to keep doing their jobs. We're seeing the same in marketing. Like, there are a lot of folks who are like, I wouldn't want to do my job without AI. Like, it would be such a drag to go back to doing it the way I was doing it before. And I think that that's an important qualitative factor to keep in mind.
I like that. It's like simple and like yet so compelling to as a thought exercise to draw that out.
Yeah.
I want to take a quick sidestep, staying on our AI theme, but a little bit sidestep from go to market. And I know you have a passion and a compelling point of view on kind of AI as an equalizer. Can you talk a little bit about what's behind that?
Sure. So I just am deeply passionate and write a lot about supporting ambitious women to achieve their goals. And I think one thing that I get really excited about, and that I've advised female executives, female entrepreneurs, female founders on, is never before have we had the opportunity to be able to step forward materially and create a competitive advantage to try and normalize and equalize the world in that way. And I think AI provides that. So I've been advising a lot of folks to look at it this way. Most of the organizations measure success in a person's ability to develop good ideas and disseminate them. And often when we have lots of good ideas, what we don't have time to do is put together that deck, right? Or put together, flesh it out so that I've done the brainstorming to think about the impact of those ideas. And then to, again, create those assets to talk to my team about them, and then figure out the operational plan to then go enact them. That all takes time. And that cycle, we're gated by how fast we can move ideas through that cycle. And often the people that move ideas through that cycle the fastest aren't necessarily the smartest, but the ones that move it through the fastest tend to have the best outcomes. And so what AI can do, and what I'm encouraging a lot of women to really lean into, is all of those ideas, all of those great things that you want to go do, leverage AI to get the idea fully through that cycle. Figure out how you're going to use it to frame the decision, to flesh out the idea, to create that operational plan, to then create that story narrative for the organization and then get it into play. I think that can be a massive equalizer. And then I am encouraging a lot of folks too to think about it in terms of how do I make myself the best, whatever it might be, CEO, founder, CMO, whatever it is. AI can help you as like a support team that you don't necessarily have, right? So things like creating an AI copy of yourself, not in like a cyborg kind of way, but in like a how do I mimic my own brain to create a second brain that I can then converse with? So giving it context around what my role is, what my challenges are, what things I'm thinking about, and have it ideate with me or help it do my thinking in advance of a meeting to be able to be super crisp and clear in that meeting. So decision framing or pre-thinking. It can also do things like help me write up and frame my ideas in a strategy much quicker. And that could be things like emails. It could be things like literally just getting my thoughts down because often, I'm a big believer of the school of thinking is writing. And so the more I can get that stuff down, the better. And then it can do things that we just breaks our brain. So things like it can analyze patterns that we are not necessarily able to see as quickly as AI might. So it might be looking at I don't know, the transcripts from all the status updates on a certain project. And it can start recognizing when we're like falling behind. It can start recognizing like this has been a problem now for a while. So instead of us having to tax our brains to constantly do that, we can put some of that cognitive burden of that pattern matching onto AI. So there's just so many use cases for how it can just make us a more robust and prepared and thoughtful strategic executive that I think it's a huge opportunity that I would encourage anyone to take advantage of.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, AI as a thought partner is by far my personal favorite use case. And I feel like I just keep peeling back the onion on different ways for myself. And the what am I not thinking of is one of those best ones, making sure that I'm
Mhm.
continually kind of feeding the right context and transcripts and all of that. And I'm finding there's like a layer of like the same way you have to think of like organizational data management is now like personal data management, like what information you have to put in, knowing obviously how to work with it to get out of it what you want, but then like making sure you close the loop so that you're kind of feeding that
Yeah.
context back in on what was the decision, what was the outcome. And so it's a different way of thinking, but it's one that is like exciting and powerful.
Yeah. And I think it also it not only accelerates that cycle, but it genuinely makes the job more fun. Like yes, they're not real people. AI is not real in that way, but the ability for us to get excited, like they used to say, ideas multiply when they come in contact with other ideas. And AI is a way to facilitate that. And I think that that can be really powerful without increasing the cognitive burden on the human. And that's the game changer.
Yes. And it doesn't hurt that they're often very complimentary, like, oh, what a great idea.
I've encouraged mine. I'm like, I need you to be a little more serious. Like, don't just tell me what I want to hear. Like,
Same, same.
make a comment or a compliment hard earned. Yeah,
Yes. Tough love from
that's
our
right.
Gen AI assistants.
That's right.
So I'd love to shift gears a bit and beyond kind of some of this discussion of like go to market and AI kind of internal to an organization, there's obviously a ton changing on the buyer side in kind of what's happening in the world. So, from your perspective, would be interested, what are kind of some of those shifts happening in buyer behavior that kind of impact how organizations need to adapt?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a bit of a broken record out there with everyone else, but like the buyers are absolutely overwhelmed with the amount of content that is coming their way. At first, it was great because AI made that possible, but now we've absolutely flooded the zone, and that has made our prospects extremely leery and weary of taking in all of that content. And the problem is we raise the bar. Like the content is now good enough in many cases. And so to stand out as a human requires an extraordinary level of effort. And buyers are craving that human connection. So I'm getting really excited about some of the stuff that I'm seeing people do with getting more creative about personalization, stacking signals. So it's like, there's no way maybe AI could have put this together. Things like, yes, there's the classic signals of, job change or initiatives I saw, but then it's like, hey, saw you just moved to this new city. Like really trying to make it more personal and then doing things that AI can't do, like gifting, finding channels that literally cannot be done by AI today, handwritten notes, all of that kind of stuff. I think that buyers, because of the fatigue, they are craving more of those human touches. And they are craving somebody to cut through the noise. And so I'm seeing that lead to where go to market teams need to be doing even more of the work for their customer than they ever have before in any sales cycle. So it'd be things like, if I want to ask for, we're having good conversations and I want to ask for other people in the organization to talk to. The old way was we had to go find those people. Like, can you introduce me to this person? It's like, let's do the heavy lifting of finding the person. Now, we might also do the heavy lifting of finding the person, but do everything to create the use case so that that person doesn't even have to create the message of the value to that person. So as much of that burden that we can take off of the customer, the prospect, the buyer as possible, that is getting attention. They are engaging with that, but it does put a lot more burden on the go-to-market organization to create those moments.
Yeah. Well, and to your point from earlier, right? If you're freeing up that time because of the productivity gains, that's a perfect example of where you want to be spending it. It's kind of what's human. It
Absolutely.
requires that judgment, what you can't do in that kind of mass personalization uh, kind of environment.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, we're talking a lot internally and with clients around, because of the buyers being overwhelmed and it's hard to know which signals are trustworthy and all of that, just kind of a growing importance on brand, as we talked about a little bit earlier in the conversation, but then also on like partnerships and the ecosystems that you're in. So I'm curious if you're seeing shifts in kind of go-to-market models, kind of a difference in reliance and kind of going to market direct versus partnerships or anything along those lines.
I mean, I wouldn't say that I've noticed anything materially different. It obviously depends on the business, like those that where partnerships are complementary and open up access to prospect bases that we wouldn't have before. Definitely folks are still doing that. I think that where I am seeing interesting things now is again back to the comment on brand. Before it might have been this brand is partnering with this brand. Now it's this person is partnering with this person and they happen to both be at these different companies. So leveraging that more personal element to brand, and then the as we are seeing, different models or partnerships or things like that, it is about those personal connections now becoming evident. I think that's really interesting. I also think um, you know, PLG is still very much a thing. I think we're seeing some creativity in pricing models, like as terms of how people are buying technology, and therefore people are just getting really creative about pricing in general right now, especially if you're building on top of AI. So things like outcome-based pricing. I'm even seeing that trickle into changing the way services are pricing. Um, but I don't know that there's necessarily any one set way that is the best practice now. But all that to say is like now is the time to experiment. Take all of the assumptions off the table and say, what can we do to absolutely delight our buyers? Everything's fair game in terms of how we change things. And I want folks to keep that in mind because that is where the coolest creative ideas are coming today is take out all those old assumptions of how we did things and let's just figure out what might work in this situation and then we can scale it from there.
I think that's great advice. And I want to ask, thinking about founders that are really looking at how to engage with their board or their investors in this world where go to market is changing. Are there certain things you feel like founders have to get right on the go to market side to build that confidence with those audiences these days?
Yeah, I think and this is maybe an oldie but goodie. But it always comes back around. So I often see there's a rush to scale before we've even figured out what works. And this applies to AI as well. Focusing on that unit of one, like how can we just do one thing really amazing? And that could mean like we absolutely knocked it out of the park for that one account. Once we figure out that, then we can figure out how to scale it. But I think rushing past that and trying to scale and then running into problems like we don't know why they bought or we don't know why they turned or like we sort of know, but like it feels like maybe that's not the real reason. Like it just leaves us blind in so many ways. And I see a lot of teams having to revisit that unit of one as a result. And so I would encourage anyone, like, especially if, we're rolling this up to the board. The board wants to know repeatability, right? Scalability and repeatability of the success that we're having. And so if we can't really articulate that because we have those specific unit of one examples, then we got to go back and figure that out because that's what gives us the confidence to make the decisions to then do the scale in the first place. So I just feel like it's so critical to not rush past that. And I'm not the first one to say this, like lots of people have said do unscalable things, right? But I see that pattern happen again and again. And teams have to revisit. The other thing is to not be afraid to test and try different things, but to not get so caught up in the testing that we miss when one good thing happened. And so it's like a paying attention, like slow down to speed up type of thing where we really have that, and AI can be very beneficial to this, which is let's get really, really good hygiene around how we assess the outcomes. Not just like, great, there's revenue. Yay. We want that. But can we go back and, back in the day, 20 plus years ago, I used to be part of a market research firm that did win-loss studies. And it was a big thing. And you paid a lot of money because we had to call 50 of your customers and like some of the ones that didn't. And we would try and get those insights for you. You don't have to do that anymore. Like you don't have to spend hundred thousands, dollars on doing that. You can do that yourself every quarter. And when I think about the organizations that have scaled the fastest and had the most unicorn-like growth, it's those that had the operational hygiene to understand when those patterns were emerging. And before they would do it without AI, now we can do it with AI. It's even easier. But taking the time and developing the organizational cadences and hygiene to look is really important. And those are the things that give us greater confidence in the board meeting.
That is so powerful. Yeah, I love that. So powerful. And I think just a great reminder of the importance of having the discipline and the foundations and then doing things in new ways and that experimentation. So I think that's a great place to wrap up the conversation. And as we do that, if listeners want to get in touch, can you let them know the best way to do that?
Sure. Find me on LinkedIn. I would love that. And then I would just also say, like, if you're an ambitious woman and you want support and figure out how to leverage AI, let me know. I want to make every single one of them dangerous. And that's not to say I wouldn't take, the call from anyone else, but it's just definitely a personal passion of mine. So reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd love to continue the conversation. And I wish everyone the best.
Thank you. That is very generous, very generous offer. And thank you so much for this conversation. I really loved hearing about so much of what you shared and what we discussed around and how you're actually seeing AI drive kind of real transformation in those examples in go-to-market and what needs to happen to make that possible. I love the focus on that true personalization and the impact of kind of people-driven brand and branding efforts. So really appreciate so much of what you shared.
Thanks so much for having me, Natalie. It was great.
All my pleasure. And thank you too to everyone that's listening. If today's conversation sparked something for you, and I'm pretty sure that it did, please pass this along to another leader in your network. We know these are the conversations that really help us scale smarter, build stronger, and create more resilient go-to-market engines. So thanks again, Kristina. And this has been another amazing conversation on Shift and Thrive. I'll see you all next time. That's a wrap for this week's episode. For show notes and more, visit shiftandthrivepodcast.com. A special thank you to our sponsor, Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service marketing agency to help B2B companies fuel their growth. For more information on Magnitude and to get your complimentary transformation readiness assessment, visit magnitudeconsulting.com/getready. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.